But in verse 3, he says, he left Judea, departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So again, geographical locations are important details throughout this chapter. Again, in verse 5, he says, so he finally came to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, and ultimately he stops there. Why? Because he was wearied from his journey in verse 6, and he's thirsty. So we have geographical location and thirst as two mainstays within the scripture so far. Verse 7, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink, for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So going on this idea of thirst, Jesus being the Lord that he is, knowing all things, he asks a woman of Samaria, which Samaritans and Jews didn't coincide very well in those days culturally. So there was some beef. And he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would ask him, you would ask me, and he would give you living water. Verse 11, the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, verse 13, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing up into everlasting life. Lastly, verse 15, the woman said to him, sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. So we see an issue in the understanding of the Samaritan woman. Jesus consistently is introducing spiritual language to the woman, and it's just going over her head. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And then he goes on to say, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing up into everlasting life. And it keeps going over her head. She keeps asking, where can I get this water so I don't have to come back to this well? Where can I find this so I don't have to walk miles with a pot of a bucket of water and keep coming back here every day in the hot sun? Eventually, Jesus comes to a point where he has to let her know what he's actually after. And just like in the previous episode, he's after the heart of the matter. So he says to her in verse 16, go call your husband and come here. Verse 17, the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus says, you have well said, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband, and that you spoke truly. Then, in verse 19, she finally realizes, and she says, the woman said to him, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. It wasn't until that Jesus began to tell her about herself in a way that she could understand, was when she realized that the whole time he was speaking of an inner spiritual reality. And so that is what Jesus is breaking down when he says, if you knew the gift of God is salvation. And he was giving the remedy to her issue, which was thirst. Jesus, knowing that this woman has been married 5 times, and the man that she lives with now is not her husband. So think contextually and just very practically. In those days, a woman would need to be married to have any kind of security, provision financially, protection physically. She can't start a business. She can't do certain things that are the norm of our day. She would need a man to help her, to cover her, to provide for her in all the ways that were natural in those days. But what Jesus picks at is that ultimately, woman, your issue is that you're thirsty. And that's why he says, if you knew the gift of God, if you knew what I could provide for you, you would be asking me for water. And what does this water do? Verse 14. Whoever drinks of this water that I shall give him will never thirst. And secondly, it will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. So Jesus made a summary of her life lived to try to reveal to her the issue of not her life lived, firstly, but the issue of her inner dissatisfaction. And so what we see here is that ultimately the sin issue, the heart issue, the sin issue is an issue of satisfaction. It's an issue of thirst. We have gone, each one of us have gone our own way, have been led astray, and we have gone to the things of the world, our own mind, our own makeup, our own leanings, whatever we think is right. We have gone to that thinking that it will fill the void that is already resident within us. There's a scripture for that. Proverbs says, there is a way that seems right to man, but the end of it leads to destruction. The end of it leads to death. And that is the state that God finds all of his children, all of his creation in, is that we consistently go to the things of the world, drinking of the things of the world to try to satisfy our thirst, not knowing that it is the gift of God that actually is the only thing that can provide the water enough, powerful enough, hydrating enough to quench the thirst of the heart of man.